Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Huge work mistake. Forgot an airline crew in a McDonald's in Portugal for 5 days. What's your biggest work-related mistake? Part 2. I accidentally knocked over 2 aisles filled with wine glasses. Lucky for me, everyone was too busy freaking the F out. There was apparently a customer nearby who also got a few cuts on his legs that they didn't notice me slowly slipping away and reappearing a few seconds later to ask what happened. No one ever suspected it was me, but I still felt horrible because it was over a few $1,000s worth of stuff that I broke, which may not sound like much, but when you're 15 years old working on $11 an hour, 5 hours a week... I had a project to refurbish the sump in a hydrochloric acid containment structure in a refinery. Basically, the HCI tank had a wall around it so that if the tank leaked, the HCI would be contained. Inside the wall was a sump full of water used to scrub out the fumes when the tank was filled. Never mind, this sump was full of very acidic water, and even after pumping it out and flushing it several times, the pH was 0. Yes, 0. Well, we couldn't use the special epoxy to repair the cracked concrete until the pH was like 2 or something, so I suggested that we put some NaOH into the next flush to try to bring the pH up enough. The manager in charge said, "Good idea, just fill it with straight caustic," the industry term for NaOH. That wasn't my intention, but I went along, and when we came back the next day, the sump was gone. Gone. The NaOH had just eaten the HCI-soaked concrete in a frenzy of reactive chemistry. Now, for those of you who remember your high school chemistry, HCl plus NaOH equals NaCl plus H2O. For those who don't, I had made a puddle of salt water where there had been acid-soaked ground before. Pretty innocuous, but that's not how the EPA sees things. It was a spill to ground of more than 1 barrel of NaOH and thus a reportable incident. Oh, and the sump was dissolved. My boss was very cool about it and we built a new sump and put it in the big hole I'd created and excellent alles. My dad tells of a story when he, an electrician, plugged in some wires backwards and blew up a $10,000 piece of equipment. His boss was really cool though and told him, "Just consider this a $10,000 investment in your education." Killed all power to a stage venue with 1,200 people raving hard. Longest 30 seconds ever while I switched the broken cable out. Did the same thing during an outdoor festival in Charlotte, North Carolina back in the early 90s. During the Dave Matthews set, the lighting guy got a little carried away and tripped the breaker for the entire lighting rig. So they send me, the newbie, under the stage to turn it back on. Problem is, there are 2 disconnect boxes, one for audio and one for lighting. And they aren't marked audio/lighting, nor do they have any indication of which way is on/off. The band is cranking away in the dark but still playing, and I figure F it, I've got a 50-50 chance. I choose one of the disconnects and throw the switch. Of course, the lights don't come on and the audio system made a weird burping noise right before going silent. There's nothing quite like the sound of 10,000 people going, "Oh." I promptly corrected my mistake and turned it all back on. Back in high school, I had a job as a web designer at a small web shop servicing nonprofit organizations. My boss didn't let on that I was as young as I was, and they handled all the face-to-face client meetings. My job basically entailed designing and preparing the website for our clients. One of our big clients was Christopher Reeve Paralysis Foundation. I sliced up the site and put in filler text, knowing full well that only people coming from our internal IP would be able to see the development. I should mention that my company was small, close-knit, and had a great, albeit vulgar, sense of humor. Rather than going the standard lorem ipsum route, I instead filled in something along the lines of, "Herp derp, I'm Christopher Reeve, I drive myself with a straw. Weaknesses include kryptonite and falling off horses." It got worse, but I'll let your imaginations fill in the blanks. There were about 4 paragraphs of filler text. I came into work after school one day and all three of my company's owners / my bosses were waiting for me. I thought they were pulling some prank, but they asked me to come into their office. At this point, I knew something was definitely up. My boss, Chris and Dana, saw the site. Me. What? Who? Him. CRPF. Chris and Dana Reeve. The director wanted to show them the progress. Apparently he didn't check before he showed it to him in person. At this point, I think my stomach hit the floor and kept going straight on to the Earth's core. My boss told me he'd let me know what the next steps were, but just to know that I was in deep, deep S. Anyway, I didn't get fired, despite how adamant Dana Reeve was about the fact, and I had to write an apology to the Reeves. I found out later that Chris actually had a pretty solid sense of humor and thought it was funny. R.I.P. Mr. and Mrs. Reeve. I left a huge legal folder for a multi-billion, with a B, lawsuit on the subway. Some homeless guy finds it, calls the opposing attorney, and ransoms the D-thing. Luckily, there was nothing in the file that wasn't secret or not public record. Needless to say, I was fired. Accidentally sent out the salaries of every one of our executives and the owner to about 100 people in the company. The TLDR is that I requested info from HR, just a list of eligible employees for something, and what they sent had the default Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3 tabs at the bottom of the workbook. Sheet 1 was the list I had requested. Sheet 2 was, for some reason, executive compensation. It sucked. It went a little something like this. I work a small cinema in small town where everyone knows everyone, and I put my hand up to work the midnight release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Everything was going well. Cinemas were working fine, the food was plentiful, and everyone was having a wonderful time. Until I remembered I never actually had the hard drive, our cinema is DCI, for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. I used to be a product merchandiser for Coca-Cola a few years ago. Basically, what I did was go to grocery stores, meet the driver dropping the delivery, and stock the shelves as fast as possible and get to the next store, repeat. My second day on the job, I was stocking 2-liter bottles at this mega grocery store, running a bit behind because the order came in late, so I was moving fast. Dropped a bottle of Sprite on the floor and it hit cap down. That little beast shot up from the air and cleared 4 aisles. Luckily, it didn't hit anyone. On my last day of working for Coke, same thing happened, except this time it went flying straight for the cash and nearly hit some lady in the head. As I headed to the back room to get a mop, every employee was lined up applauding. One of them offered to clean it up as it was the funniest thing he'd seen working at the store, and that was the last bottle I stocked working for Coca-Cola. Forgot a semicolon in a 25K line firewall infrastructure configuration file that I was cleaning up over several months because the people before me were such lazy Fs. Took about 3 months for it to have an impact. When it did, it took out a major investment bank overnight. I fixed it half an hour before trading opened and they would start losing bajillions. To be fair, it wasn't entirely my fault. I'd inherited awful, horrible management tools that hadn't been updated in years, huge amounts of undocumented cruft and kludges, and obsolete hardware. I was the only guy out of a team of 4 who bothered to pick up his phone when everything broke that night. The on-call guy, his deputy, and the manager were all missing, and it came at 2300, drunk off my A, to a room full of nail-chewing managers wanting me to do something, do anything, fix it now! I could barely see the monitor, let alone type. A colleague came in, looked around, ran out, returned with a cup full of cigarettes and an ashtray and some black coffee and muttered something like, "I think you're gonna need this," and fled. It was almost as bad as the time I put in an 84-hour straight day, but that's another story. Or the episode with the baseball bat. Or the garden hose and the overheating server room exhaust. Or the contractors racing trolleys full of new top-end laptops down the loading ramps straight into the sprinkler system, or the top traders with bucket loads of child pee. I made a lot of money at that job. I would never do it again. Never. I was in the middle of a remote assistance session with a user who had been having trouble with his Outlook. I resolved his issue and proceeded to send a test email to myself along the lines of, "Test, this is a test." I was doing a million other things at once, so I wasn't paying attention to the screen or keyboard, and when I looked at the screen, my heart sank. TT, this is a T. Luckily, the user I was on the phone with was a good sport and thought it was hilarious. I was pretty mortified. I was working as a cameraman in high school. One night, I was working alone at our town hall filming a committee meeting, and my boss gave me the keys. I was told to break down and lock up after the shoot. I forgot to lock the town hall. My effing town hall was wide open for a whole weekend. I realized this after I returned the keys, so for the whole weekend I was freaking out thinking everything would be stolen and they would trace this mistake back to me. Nothing was stolen and everything was fine. I've never actually told anyone this before. I used to work on a ship. I wasn't particularly high up in the rankings, but I'd like to think I served an important function. I was kind of like the handyman going around fixing various things that were broken, such as vending machines for the rest of the crew. Despite me failing a few exams, the captain gave me the opportunity to fix an important engine part. I don't know what I did wrong, but I didn't seal the plate properly and the whole thing unexpectedly blew. It happened literally as I was explaining the problem I had with it to the captain. I worked in a warehouse once unloading trucks of mostly food and sometimes cigarettes. I was unloading a few pallets of cigarettes and accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake. I reamed the boxes. I thought I was fired for sure, as reaming a box of cigarettes costs quite a bit, $50 a carton, 30 cartons a box. Turns out I missed the Marlboros and hit some mini cigars that were packed on top. Things are like $5 a carton. Boss was happy he didn't have to fire me for it, so it worked out. Another time I ran a thing into a shelf which knocked it over and then knocked over the one next to it like dominoes. I didn't have a driver's license at the time, so I'm not really sure why they kept having me drive that forklift. Now I'm behind a computer screen away from heavy machinery. I'm sure everyone is safer for it. It was an extremely hot day, and I was playing for a festival crowd of thousands. These festival tents warm up quite fast, and I dehydrated like crazy under those hot lamps. It wasn't the ordinary festival, when I suddenly decided to grab a microphone and tell the crowd I was thirsty. I've never seen this much liquid, mostly beer, flying through the air towards me. When I finished the set and one of the stagehands lifted up one of the CDJs, there were about 3 liters of beer running out of it. I am a chemist, and over the period of about a year, I was doing a series of very dangerous reactions. Essentially, I had to mix a strong acid with an alcohol solvent and several other chemicals, seal the chemicals in a strong glass bottle, high pressure reactor, seal the bottle, and submerge the reaction vessel in 175 degrees Celsius silicone oil. If any of you have heated up a closed container, you know this builds internal pressure inside the container. I kept a valve on top of the reactor to monitor the pressure. The container was rated to be safe at pressures up to 150 psi. Unfortunately for me, one particular day I started warming up the reaction and the heat was applied to the solution just fast enough in just the right way to start a runaway polymerization reaction. If you're a chemist, you just cringed. This runaway polymerization reaction gave off massive amounts of heat very quickly, thus shooting the pressure of this flask from 130 psi to holy H, run for your life. The resulting explosion was so loud, it sounded like an 18-wheeler slammed into the side of the building. Luckily for me and my lab associates, no one was in the room when the explosion went off. Hot shards of glass were shotgunned across the entire room, as well as a nice spray of hot silicone oil. Even worse, this explosion happened right next to the CEO's office. He ran out looking for me, to which I assured him, "We totally have everything under control." Oh god, please don't walk in there and notice I ruined your $100,000 lab." Luckily, the damage to the facilities was minimal, no one was damaged, and I got to keep my job. If you want to watch the part 1, click the link here. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, the likes, and the comments. See you in the next video.